Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Saiduddin Faridi, and on behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I am delighted to invite you and welcome you to the ISAS International Conference on South Asia 2023. The theme for this year's conference is Everyday Experiences of the State in South Asia, and over the course of the conference between today and 25th of October, we will hear perspectives from several scholars across the world working on themes and issues in South Asia. We will now begin with the opening session and the keynote address for the conference, and we are delighted to have with us Professor James Manor, Emeritus Professor of Commonwealth Studies at the Institute of Commonwealth Studies at the University of London. The keynote address is followed by a discussion session where I would invite the audience to share any questions that they may have using the Q&A function on Zoom. This will be moderated by Dr. Iqbal Singh Sevia, Director of the Institute of South Asian Studies here at the National University of Singapore. I will now hand over the session to Dr. Sevia.
Thank you, Syed. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone, depending on whichever part of the world you are joining us from. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, I would like to thank you all for joining us for today's keynote address and roundtable panel. The keynote address and the following panel will kick off ISAS's annual conference on South Asia. The Institute of South Asian Studies is a research institute in the National University of Singapore that focuses on the study of contemporary South Asia, and the International Conference on South Asia is our flagship event. Each year, the Institute organizes a conference that focuses on a topic that is of salience to developments in the South Asia region. The aim is to invite scholars from across the globe who are conducting cutting-edge research in various disciplines to provide critical and innovative perspectives on a chosen topic. The topic for this year is Everyday Experiences of the State in South Asia. When we brainstormed to pick the topic for this year's conference, the impact of the pandemic on South Asia and the subsequent questions over state capacity, perceptions of the state, and expectations that individual citizens have from the state, and how the state is experienced by various sections of society during a crisis were questions that we kept circling back to. These are, of course, intrinsically linked to broader questions on state authority and the complex relations between the individual, communities, and the state. We were also keen to see how digitization and the rise of new technology have impacted the way the state is experienced. These issues are particularly salient given that many countries in South Asia will be having important regional and national elections in the following months and in 2024. Now, the state in South Asia is an amorphous entity. In many ways, the state is everywhere and is all-powerful. Yet in many ways, the state is also seen as ineffective, weak, and even an outsider. Indeed, elected representatives sometimes seem to have almost paradoxical role in South Asia of being able to dole out state patronage, but also at the same time keep tentacles of the state at bay. Often, individuals elect politicians from specific communities who are able to serve as brokers of access to the state. Sometimes they elect them to mediate the impact of the state. Now, years ago, when I was a PhD student researching in India, maybe I should be more accurate about my age and say decades ago when I was researching for my PhD in India, I recall an individual from a rural constituency in India telling me that when they complained to a state minister about the lack of roads linking the village to the town, the minister said that they should think very hard about whether they really wanted the road, as it would bring them closer to the Sarkar. And the term Sarkar here referred to state authority. Now, Sarkar is one of multiple terms used to describe the state and state authority in South Asia. The use of terms like Sarkar are embedded within much older conceptions of socio-political authority and are themselves interesting as they reflect the vernacularization of conceptions of the modern state, at least in terms of the perceptions of the state. In addition to this, terms like Sarkar are also ubiquitous and can provide insights into the multiple and intimate ways in which the state is experienced. This is clear from the fact that the terms Sarkari or Sarkar can be used to refer to multiple things in South Asia, from official forms, to a siren on an ambassador car, or even to safari suits. There are, of course, many layers of Sarkar. Everyday life in South Asia is dependent and contingent in different capacities with municipal, district, state, and national level authorities. Which of these are seen as encompassing state authority at the everyday level? Which of these are seen to be important? Which of these are seen to be feared? These questions open up several others that relate to how people understand what constitutes authority in South Asia. Moreover, state authority is experienced in conjunction with and sometimes in opposition to a series of moral, religious, and caste authorities and identities. It's important to note that the state impacts several aspects of everyday life, even when it is seen to be distant. From the bureaucratization of aspects of daily life to shaping the categories that people are legally fixed into, the state impacts and fixes identities and is experienced in very corporal ways. For instance, the project of census taking. The project of census taking can determine the category an individual is fit into, whether that individual can use specific religious personal laws, if that individual is able to purchase agricultural land, and if that individual is entitled to stand for elections in specific reserved seats. As the state manifests itself in complex and multiple forms in the everyday lived experiences, it is useful for us to critically examine the institutions, bureaucratic structures, and processes of political power and contestations through which the relationship between individuals, communities, and the state is negotiated. In line with this, this conference focuses on three broad themes. The first is the perception by people of the state in everyday encounters. The second is the state in governance. And the third is the limits and boundaries of the modern nation state. Gender is a cross-cutting subject that cannot be isolated from these themes and thus will be dealt with throughout the panels. To provide an in-depth perspective on these issues, this conference brings together scholars working in different disciplines such as political science, history, sociology, geography, international relations, anthropology, cultural studies, legal studies, and communications and new media, among others. Over 3 days, we will have 6 roundtables that will explore everyday imaginations of authority, everyday experiences of the state, the politics of state delivery and state capacity, identity and the state, and how the state regulates data, labor, and bodies. I'm thankful to all the speakers participating in this conference and everyone who will be joining us over the following days. I'm sure we will have enriching sessions, and like all of you, I'm looking forward to learning from the discussions that will take place today and the days to follow. Thank you, and I would now like to welcome Professor James Manor to deliver his address. James, over to you.
Thank you very much. The topic you're interested in is crucial, and something momentous has been happening in South Asia, which affect the way that people perceive states, and experience their states, because 4 major countries in the region face serious crises. The crises in Pakistan and Bangladesh are the most serious since 1971. Those in Sri Lanka and India are deeper than any since independence. And we've never seen anything like this, 4 crises all at once. The crises differ. Pakistan and Sri Lanka are experiencing twin economic and political crises. Crises in India and Bangladesh are mostly political. Let us briefly consider each of these 4 cases in the limited time I've got here. In Pakistan, Maliha Lodi sees the current economic crisis as the most serious in Pakistan's history. She says it's the result of dysfunctional politics, mounting governance challenges, visionless economic management, crumbling public faith in state institutions. 55% of national expenditure goes on debt servicing. After funding the military, only 8% is left for health, education, etc., which clearly impacts on the experiences of ordinary people when they look to the state. The army felt threatened by the growing importance of social media, and more assertive courts. So in 2018, it turned to Imran Khan. They thought they could control him while he attracted broad support, helped to manage that support in ways that would promote social cohesion, and social cohesion is very important to the army. But Imran eventually harshly criticized military leaders. He appointed to the youth, he appealed to the youthful urban middle class and lower middle classes, which have grown in size dramatically in Pakistan. He sought to rouse these people as a counterweight to the landed elite's power and to the army's dominance of politics. This was too much for the army. He was ousted in April of 2022. And since May of 2023, thousands in his party have been jailed amid spectacular levels of violence against the party, producing a mass exodus of party leadership. Imran Khan was also jailed himself and cannot contest any future election, which the army fears he might win. If his supporters feel cheated, and they do, they could react in ways that threaten social cohesion. To make matters much worse, multiple antagonisms between key institutions in the state, within the state, and within some key institutions may deny any post-election regime internal cohesion, preventing action on the economy. This is a major mess. And as Ahmed Rashid says, top institutions are at war with each other, and the country is teetering at the brink of the abyss. In Sri Lanka, the Rajapaksa brothers, in power most of the time since 2005, were grossly abusive to the population and also inept. They were spectacularly mismanaged the economy. By the time Mahinda Rajapaksa left office as president in 2015, he had trebled the national debt, which stood at $44 billion US, and under their leadership, corruption soared. Between 2015 and 2019, things improved a bit, and competent economic management was imposed by the finance ministry and the central bank. But in 2019, the Rajapaksas returned to power, and that brought a revival of their irresponsible habits, including massive tax cuts, heedless borrowing, and deep indebtedness for the country. By 2022, there were widespread shortages of basic commodities, and in April of 22, Sri Lanka defaulted on its sovereign debt. A humanitarian emergency loomed for the first time in the island's history. In May, a ferocious popular reaction erupted. A startling sign that we are in new territory here, new political territory, is the near absence from the reaction against the Rajapaksas of ethnic antagonisms that have scarred Sri Lanka's politics since 1958. A huge crowd stormed the Prime Minister's official residence. In July 2022, protesters torched the private residence of Ranil Wickremesinghe, who had been made Prime Minister, and they occupied the office and residence of the president. You probably saw videos of them swimming in his swimming pool. And the last Rajapaksa, in July 22, finally resigned the presidency. However, Rajapaksa loyalists who dominate parliament then chose Wickremesinghe, whose party had been largely wiped out at the last parliamentary election, to succeed him. And troops and police were soon used force to clear the main base of the protesters. The protesters, meanwhile, were deeply divided about their democratic goals and their agendas. And they began, once the Rajapaksas were gone, they began to disintegrate into various quarreling groups. Confusion reigned, and in the confusion, Wickremesinghe was able to impose a counter-democratic backlash with the backing of the political class that had much to lose. As 2023 opened, to please the IMF, Wickremesinghe increased income taxes, which even the middle class found ruinous. A quarter of the population needed emergency assistance. And yet Wickremesinghe took a hard line, calling protesters fascists and anarchists, and he called students terrorists. A new draconian anti-terrorism bill enables the term terrorism to be applied to peaceful protests. Police even mistreated the families of protesters. And the United Nations said that torture was being used. That inflamed already furious popular anger still further. Wickremesinghe hopes that his repressive restoration of something called order and an IMF deal will win him a presidential election due in 2024. But it's very hard to see how he can succeed. It's also hard to see where an alternative government might come from, because opposition parties are in disarray, they have organizational problems, and they're busy attacking one another. It's a very worrying situation. In Bangladesh, an election is due in January, and the country faces an extreme political crisis, not an economic crisis. The New York Times reports that multi-party democracy is being methodically strangled. About half of the 5 million members of the main opposition party, the Bangladesh National Party, face court cases. Most active leaders and organizers in the party face dozens, even hundreds of court cases. Disappearances of people are common. The opposition leader, Begum Zia, is under house arrest. All of that is from the New York Times. But similar reports can be found in The Economist, from Amnesty International, from Human Rights Watch, and from Freedom House. The stories are consistent. Unprovoked attacks by police and armed thugs, that is to say, unprovoked beatings, acts of arson, etc., against opposition parties' peaceful protests and their offices have occurred in many places, and when the thugs are busy, the police often stand by. The media in Bangladesh are not free. All of this adds up to the most extreme assault on democracy since the military dictatorship ended more than 30 years ago. In India, Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, and he has led a determined drive towards authoritarianism and the demonization and persecution of Muslims. He's made great headway so that India is no longer a liberal democracy. The playing field is drastically tilted. Modi's right-hand man, Amit Shah, has said that the BJP, the ruling party, seeks not just dominance, but an opposition-mukt, that is, opposition-free India. This shows utter contempt for rival parties, which he describes in subhuman terms as snakes, rats, cats, and dogs. When the ruling BJP fails to win state elections and then takes power by inducing defections from legislators, it shows utter contempt for voters and the democratic process. Parliament is largely disempowered. Most cabinet ministers learn of their policies through their civil servants, who get the messages handed down from the vastly empowered Prime Minister's office. India's election commission has been tamed. so that the Election Commission routinely permits Modi to get away with abuses, violations of the code of conduct, which are supposed to bind all campaigners. Most of the media have also been tamed. Two large teams, one within the ruling party, one within the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, monitor media reports every day. When they see reports that they like, they instruct editors to reissue them or to produce material similar to those reports. When they see reports that they don't like, they warn editors about action against them. And sometimes objective reports, not just critical reports, trigger investigative raids by central government agencies. Raids on a massive scale in some cases. Reporters Without Borders, the international organization, sees Mr. Modi as a predator of media freedom. And its 2023 Press Freedom Index ranked India at 161st place, below Afghanistan. Hindu national extremists have violently attacked leading universities. Investigative raids are widely used against political rivals, against nonpartisan voices, and against civil society organizations. Among those civil society organizations, two Nobel Peace Prize winners, Amnesty International and Mother Teresa's organization, have been targeted by police raids. Amnesty has been forced to close its India office. Even iconic corporate executives are frightened. We're talking about major bigwigs in the corporate sector to which the Prime Minister is supposedly very sympathetic. Two of these executives have spoken of an atmosphere of fear, and a third executive has complained that they're treated like pariahs. Modi's all-embracing drive for top-down, one-man control has not only hollowed out lots of formal state institutions in India, it has hollowed out his own BJP party organization. It has been stripped of its former democratic substance. Many BJP leaders with useful skills have been replaced by inexperienced, obedient newcomers. A former BJP finance minister describes the party as a party of slaves. An extravagant personality cult has developed. One BJP leader said that Modi is the incarnation of God. And another even said that Modi is the leader of the gods. Indian democracy faces an existential crisis. It may be snuffed out. It can only be solved, the crisis can only be solved if the voters reject the BJP at the parliamentary elections due in April, May of next year. The defeat of the BJP is not a likelihood, but it is a possibility for the first time in quite a long period. Now, how does all this, how do these crises affect interactions between ordinary people and the state, ordinary people and their governments? The answers to that question and to all of your questions will vary because the four crises vary. Let me give you just one example, and you will find many others as well, no doubt. Let me give you one example of the variations that you will encounter. Let's ask, how do ordinary people experience the delivery of goods, services, and benefits from governments? Now, the economic crises in Pakistan and Sri Lanka make it almost impossible for governments to deliver much of anything to people. I'm unsure of the answer to this question in Bangladesh, but the Indian case is different and interesting. To centralize power in his own hands, Modi has largely abandoned distributing things through patron-client networks. This is a huge change. Indian politics has long operated on the basis of clientelism or patron-client distribution of goods and services. All parties have participated in this practice, and Modi is undermining it because it gives too much power to people lower down in the system. He wants to centralize power in his own hands, and so he is largely abandoning the distribution of goods and services through patrons to clients. This has weakened the bureaucracy, which is part of the system, and it has certainly weakened Modi's own party organization. So that if Modi were suddenly to pass from the scene, the BJP organization, which is a flimsy thing now, made flimsy by Modi, might not be able to sustain the Hindu nationalist project. Anyway, how does Modi deliver goods and services if he's not using patron-client networks? He delivers these things through computerized IT, information technology systems, computerized right down to the village level. He likes these systems because he thinks he can control them, and to some extent he's right. And he also thinks that if he controls them, they all come from him, he can claim credit for them. And he does that. Personal control of everything, personal credit for everything are extremely important to Mr. Modi. But there's a problem here, and it's a problem for the people who seek goods, services, and benefits. Careful studies of these IT systems reveal that they often malfunction. They often exclude many people who are left empty-handed and even desperate. This is very clear from studies of the Aadhaar system, which is the main IT structure used by Modi for these purposes. Aadhaar is hailed as a great success by the controlled media, by the government, and even by some independent observers who ought to know better. But if you look carefully at how Aadhaar works and how it malfunctions, you see that there are major problems which leave many people, as I say, angry and desperate. If they remain angry and desperate, they may actually turn on Modi at the election in April and May. That's one of several problems that he has as that election approaches. Now, this business of the delivery of goods and services benefits is just one example of the variations we find from one country to the next in South Asia. You must consider many other ways that these four crises affect your main themes, including ordinary people's perceptions of the state in everyday encounters and the limits and boundaries of the modern nation state. As you discover these things, just remember that these crises exist. They're a crucial factor in the background. And remember that you're dealing with two regimes that are close to collapse, Pakistan and Sri Lanka, and two regimes that are aggressively repressive. Let me just mention a few other issues. You may find, as you have your discussions and do your research, that people, ordinary citizens, may see the state as irrelevant because it cannot help them or hurt them, although these four different crises make that perception less common. Autocratic actions by governments may intimidate people. They may inspire passivity among people. In some cases, the state may pose dangers to liberty and life, which may make people frightened, angry, and sometimes quiet, but also sometimes ready to react. Governments may fear that autocratic actions do not give them enough political control. in an open system, which is why they undermine the fairness of elections to deny angry people the chance to reject them. That affects people's interactions and perceptions of the state. Government intrusions on media freedom are aimed at changing people's perceptions. This may work, but it also may not. It has not worked across India in numerous state level elections, which the BJP has lost. In India, the Modi government seeks to fix people's preoccupations upon their religious and national identities, to get them to become preoccupied with those things and to stay preoccupied. But Indians have long refused to fix for very long upon any of the many identities available to them. They have regional, linguistic, caste, religious, national, subnational, local, gender, class, etc., urban, rural identity. They have a huge array of identities available to them, and they tend not to fix their preoccupations upon any one of these identities. If the Modi government succeeds in getting Indians to fix upon their religious identities, it will be a fundamental change, but it's a huge task to achieve that, and it may not happen. I think you also need to remember that these four crises are happening as the underpinnings of politics are changing. Changing as a result of demographic change, technological, and social change. Just to take one quick example, in Pakistan, 44% of citizens are aged between 18 and 35. The urban middle and lower middle classes have become a larger, more active, and more mobilizable and less controllable political force. And social media have given political elites there and elsewhere, including opposition forces, the technological tools to reach these new and newly active groups. These are the kinds of things you need to be aware of as you consider your questions, your issues. And there are lots of other things that you need to consider. But as you do so, please remember that these four crises, these varied crises, cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that broad and comprehensive review of that lays out the context for many of the discussions and debates that will take place over the coming days. And I think you've alluded to a number of the themes that we'll be discussing more fully. So the floor is open for questions, and some questions have already started to come in. But I'm going to exercise my right of prerogative as moderator to perhaps throw one or two questions your way as more come in. Now you alluded to I wouldn't say alluded, but you discussed in detail the crises that a number of countries in South Asia are facing and how those impact upon the perceptions of towards the state as well. And I just wanted to see if I could draw you to engage a little more with the issue of, do you perceive a growing distinction in the way in which elites in South Asia and other sections of the non-elite sections of society perceive the state and its role? And what are some of the manifestations of this, if so?
Well, the answers to this question vary from case to case. Elites in Sri Lanka and non-elites are completely fed up with a political class, with a succession of regimes, and with the appalling mess that they have created. And so there's kind of utter dismissal and contempt amongst most people, apparently, in Sri Lanka. In Pakistan, amidst the current wave of violent repression against the Bangladesh National Party, the main opposition party, people may be keeping their heads down. And elites are certainly keeping their heads down. And they may be forgetting that over the last 8 or so years, the economy has performed very well in Bangladesh, but the kind of ferocious repression that's taking place there alters the rules of the game entirely. In Pakistan, you have this very large number of youngish, mainly urban people who were excited by Imran Khan's role in politics and who wanted to become a new kind of elite, contemptuous towards the rural, large landowning elite of Punjab and Sindh, who have dominated politics in Pakistan. They may be fed up with that and fed up with the dominance of the army, but there's not a lot they can do about it. But the crises change these perceptions substantially, and across India you have an extremely complicated, as usual, complicated situation where you have many people expressing great enthusiasm for majoritarian views that Modi has promoted, and for communalist views that he has promoted. But you have an awful lot of people who are unhappy with things under the surface, and Modi lately has kept doing things that alienate significant numbers of people needlessly. And he recently his people claimed that farmers were backing alleged terrorists, and the terrorists are people who have been arrested on trumped up charges to suppress media freedom. This is to attack the farmers for a prime minister is very politically inept and unwise. And so you have this complicated mixture of different groups who feel alienated, other groups who feel excited by Hindu nationalist assertions. And the situation is, as usual, very complicated and hard to read. So the answer to your question is a kind of minefield through which your conference now must proceed.
Thank you. And related to something you brought up, you mentioned the importance of the state and the provision of welfare. And I'm wondering if we look at the post-COVID state in South Asia, if there's such a thing as a post-COVID state, did in your view the COVID pandemic impact the way the state is perceived, given that so many polities in South Asia entrench themselves or reify themselves through the provision of welfare to its citizens?
I'm sure that the pandemic affected how people perceive the state. We don't really have good. Maybe some of your colleagues have studied this, and let's hope that we learn something at the conference. But I haven't seen very convincing information from any of these four countries on how public perceptions of the state were affected by the COVID and by the government's various handlings of the pandemic. And here you have to wade through an awful lot of government propaganda, especially in India, frankly. But I'm not sure how that happens. What I do think is that the way that welfare and goods and services are delivered to ordinary people by the state, that's been changing in each of these four cases. And the changes were visible before the pandemic, before COVID, and they're visible again since COVID. And you see an increasing crippling of the state's capacity to deliver in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. As I said, I don't really know the story very well in Bangladesh, but in India, you clearly see this shift by Modi away from the old modes of delivery through the bureaucracy and through party organization working with patron-client ties. You see that old kind of distribution politics increasingly abandoned in favor of these IT systems. Sometimes they work, but I'm not convinced that they work often enough to benefit Modi as he expects. So many people have benefited from the IT distributions in India. Many people have not. And it's a mixed picture. It's not a mixed picture in Lanka and Pakistan, where things have gone south, drastically bad. In Bangladesh, I don't know the answer to your question.
Thank you. And if I could circle back to the question of elites, there's a question that's come in from somebody who's following this chat at the moment, and they're asking if the rise of Narendra Modi can be seen as a backlash towards the old elites and an assertion by the rural subaltern landowning classes by emerging as the new elites.
The rural subaltern land-owning classes? Was that what you said?
That's what the question is about.
Right. I think the initial election of Modi in 2014 was part of a backlash against a Congress-led government that had been in power for 10 years and had become very unpleasant in some ways, and it had been hit by major corruption scandals in 2010, etc. And I think that was a backlash against that government. Whether it's a backlash against an old elite more generally, I don't know. The social base on which Modi has won elections is a complicated one, but what he is basically in most regions of India, he's succeeded in winning the support of higher castes and of urbanites, who are the traditional supporters of the BJP anyway. But to that, he has attracted some Dalit votes and some OBC, other backward class votes, which have not always gone to the BJP. And this combination of forces has won him national elections, not so much state level elections, where the party often loses, but national level elections. Now, does this mean that Modi is supporting rural subaltern landowning classes? Many OBCs in rural areas would fit into that category. And so he certainly has won the support of some of these people. Whether he has delivered to these people, delivered in response to these people, is another matter. The Modi government has made many promises, to use a great Indian term, many tall promises, which turn out to be false. And some of the promises that have been made would affect the rural subaltern landowning classes. He promised, for example, to double the incomes of farmers by 2022. This has not happened, nor have people who are from those groups seeking jobs. The promises of jobs have not happened, and lots of other things have not happened. It may be that Indians who are not mindless lemmings and sheep at election time, it may be that they react against these tall promises come April, May. Whether the rural subaltern landowning classes will react, I don't know. But Modi, by recently associating farmers with terrorism, is not pleasing these people. I'll leave it at that.
Both myself and James, you mentioned the issue of census and number statistics. And there's a question relating to that. There was a mention of census and number statistics which are essential for the state. Why do you think India has been delaying publication of the 2021 census and other surveys which are essential for governance?
In the government of India is not only postponing the publishing of the census supposedly due for 2021, It has not even conducted the census of 2021, the first time since the early 19th and mid-19th century. This is bizarre. And many other statistical studies which have been done by the government have not been released, as you say. One Congress MP has referred to the Modi government. The Modi government leads the NDA, the National Democratic Alliance, but the Congress MP says these letters really stand for no data available, because the Modi government keeps a great deal of information which have traditionally been made public to itself. I think the main thing the Modi government wishes to do is to conceal ambiguities and failures, because its prime minister and its propaganda machine constantly stresses that there are no ambiguities and there are no negatives. This is a wonderful, progressive, historically inspiring government. And if you allow information to creep out into the public, which undermines that pure assertion, then it's politically unhelpful. So there is, in many cases, there is no data available. I should say that the opposition have picked up on this and have begun in various states controlled by opposition parties to organize caste censuses, which are a new thing in India. And the purpose of these caste censuses is to reveal that certain disadvantaged groups, including the OBCs, the other backward classes, who include many of the rural subaltern landowning classes. The purpose of the thing is to show that there are far more of these people, far more OBCs than the BJP and other parties have thought in the past. And if there are more of these people, then maybe they ought to get much more from the state than they have been getting. The whole purpose is to undermine Modi's appeal to this numerically powerful block of votes in the coming election. So the flow of information is becoming politically very important.
Somewhat picking up on some of the strands that we've been discussing here is that it's, you mentioned the rise of figures like Imran Khan, Modi, but there are also figures like Kejriwal in India. And I mentioned Kejriwal in this category as well, because it seems to me that figures like Imran Khan, Narendra Modi, Kejriwal in India, they're able to almost position themselves as distinct from the state as well. So they can stand for elections. They can and they can talk about governance almost by differentiating themselves within as a distinct arm of authority rather than state authority. How do you see this playing out? How do you explain this?
I think you're right, and I think you're onto something that you ought to perhaps pursue a bit further. These people seek to become larger than life. They seek to become so big that they escape the bounds of normal politics, and they sometimes succeed. I mean, some leaders try this and don't, and they come crashing down. But they do tend to succeed. Imran seems to have inspired an awful lot of that kind of adulation in the Pakistani, among younger people in Pakistan. Modi clearly has an idolizing following up to a point, perhaps more of an idolizing following if you go outside India amongst the diaspora than if you're within India. But nonetheless, they do manage this, and they do manage, since they seem to be bigger than the state, transcend the state. They're sometimes able to violate norms flagrantly, which Imran and certainly Modi and certainly the Rajapaksas have done, and this damages the state, and it creates both enthusiasm, but also wildly unrealistic expectations in the minds of ordinary people. And if wildly unrealistic expectations are then disappointed, it can lead to, it may lead to a major reaction. I should just say that in certain Indian states, and perhaps across much of India, we see a bit more political volatility than in the past. And Kejriwal seems to me in Delhi, his success in winning the state level election in Delhi, coming from nowhere and sweeping the territory. Kejriwal is an example of the kind of volatility that is latent in the Indian political system, as ordinary people are prepared to throw their support behind new figures who are exciting. I would just say one other thing, and that is that we should remember, when we look at India, we should remember that since 1977, about 70% of state-level elections have been lost by ruling parties. And about 70% of state-level elections have been lost by parties with more money. So this is a country where people are accustomed to throwing out governments, despite the monetary advantages governments have. The same percentages, roughly speaking, apply to national level elections in India. So volatility is not a new thing in Indian politics.
I think we have time for one more question, and this question is phrased in a way that I think it sums up some of the things that we discussed, but also opens up a sort of another perspective on the issues that we've been discussing. Is that the question is phrased as this: you very eloquently described the dark clouds facing for South Asian nations. Do you see any silver lining in terms of how they may overcome the crises?
There have been periods in the past when there were dark clouds also. I once wrote a paper, there was a book being brought together in honor of Sir Sunny Ramphal, former Secretary General of the Commonwealth, about his time as Secretary General. And I was asked to write about the time, South Asia in the time of Sunny Ramphal. And I went down the list of countries and looked at the governments that were in charge of those countries, and all four countries, and they were all really depressing scenes. And I won't even go into detail, but every one of the four governments in these countries was depressing or worse. Sometimes they were diabolical. And Ramphal was dealt a very difficult hand. Now, today, if we look at the region, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth and everybody else is also dealt a very difficult hand because of these four crises that I'm talking about. The clouds are dark. Is there a silver lining that might emerge? Well, it's conceivable that this newly mobilized group of young middle-class and lower middle-class people in Pakistan may prove to be irrepressible by the autocratic actions of the government, and they might be able to change the politics of Pakistan to break the dominance of the military and the large landowners of Punjab and Sindh, who have held back democracy and politics in Pakistan. It's possible something new there is happening for the first time in a very long time. In India, it's conceivable. I would take me 2 more hours to explain this, but it's conceivable that Modi could lose the next parliamentary election, or at least that he could have so few seats that he would not be able to form a government. He would fall short. That's conceivable. If he falls short, then we could see the kind of institutional and political regeneration in India that we saw after the dominance of Indira and Rajiv Gandhi was broken in 1989. In Bangladesh, it's hard to see how we get beyond the current quite aggressive, repressive government and the mania that emerges from the personal hatred between Sheikh Hasina, the prime minister, and Begum Zia, the leader of the opposition. When these two ladies pass from the scene, and they are getting on in years, maybe then there will be an opportunity in Bangladesh for some kind of a more civilized government emerging, especially since the economy has not been doing too badly, and there may be enough people may have different views because their economic situation has improved. They may be more politically mature. I don't know. It's not a very bright picture. Sri Lanka, the situation looks absolutely awful. There are basic crises, crises of survival for a lot of ordinary people. And it's hard to see either that Wickremesinghe can create a government that will win re-election and govern well, or that the alternatives to him have any kind of coherent alternative to offer that could be constructive. Sri Lanka is a very depressing place. So silver linings, maybe, but let's not be naive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for opening up the our conference. You've raised you've not only highlighted some of the crises, but you've also shared your observations very candidly. And I think this will certainly be discussed and debated in the coming days. And I thank you. There are more questions, but we're out of time as we have to head to the next roundtable. So I'll have to call the conversation to a close by thanking you for joining us today. Thank you, James.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.